Good morning, friends. Here we are, lighting the candle, a world that works. Bill Correll, Ken Caputo, and Lisa Sheehan. We have amazing conversations on a weekly basis. And well, you know what? If you're listening to podcasts, and what do they call that? When you what binging one after the other, it really doesn't matter when we're recording. So this is here for you. We want to bring you the opportunity to unstick your life, have some enjoyment and pleasure, in everything that you do, and feel kind of the lightness of being that comes with being empowered. So we're having conversations, and kind of how we judge if we're doing a good job of empowering you is whether or not we're feeling empowered by the time we're done speaking with each other. And we keep showing up. So something good's happening here. With that said, since I introduced our panel today very briefly, I was wondering, we've talked in the past about boundaries. Do you think there's more we can do to kind of flesh that out, and how people can sort of navigate um, when you take on a new technique in working with people or some kind of interpersonal dynamic? There's always this opportunity at the beginning where it's possibly a little bit awkward, where you have this idea that you're going to set boundaries in certain areas, and then the next thing you know, those boundaries are creating conflict because other people don't know you have those boundaries, or whatever else may be going on there. But the thing that I think that Ken, I've heard you say in the past, is that boundaries are very, very important for people, and I was wondering if you might have some more thoughts on that.
You're muted, Ken.
Couldn't hear me? There we go. The question that comes to mind. Oh, I love the mug. Beautiful, Bill.
Yeah. Well, for you,
how like, if let's say it's just an exchange between two people or a relationship or whatever it is, how important is it to them that people respect their boundary, and how important is it to them that they respect other people's boundaries? Because I think that a lot of the disconnect could come from there. I mean, if you're kind of loose with your boundaries and then you project that onto other people, and they're a little bit more guarded, there's going to be a disconnect that probably needs to be resolved at the beginning. So, and it's in both directions. I've interacted with people who they had very firm boundaries that they wanted to be respected, but then on the flip side, they didn't, they overstepped other people's boundaries regularly, and that created tension as well. Yeah. So it seems like that's a starting point anyway.
Yeah, there's kind of a really interesting dynamic too, that simply because you say that you have boundaries doesn't mean that those boundaries actually mean anything in conversation. You are out to create something that is open and new and fresh. A request along the way to exceed or extend a boundary is very healthy. Like, for instance, Lisa, I know that normally when you and I are talking, you're going to be a little bit reserved, and you might not necessarily tell us everything that's on your mind in one sentence. But would you do me a favor this morning and possibly maybe talk for 4 or 5 minutes and see where that takes us? I like it when I hear your voice. I really enjoy it.
It sounds like a trap.
Good for you. What's he up to, that rascal?
Well, first I wanted to see what your mug says, because they can't see it, so I want to read it out loud. Oh, Quester's Way. Okay.
This is one of my trophies from a really great relationship with a very thriving business that made people love.
I wonder who that is.
Yeah, no, it's got to be somebody great.
No idea who you're talking about.
You should introduce them.
Yeah, so all of us have our own sort of experience, life's experience, training, whatever it is, books that we've read about establishing boundaries and having that be more or less like the rails that the train runs on, until the train doesn't need to be on rails at some point. I've always kind of found that when there's a sufficient amount of trust, and the trust is not violated, or the trust is violated and then immediately cleaned up, that the boundaries become less necessary, but it's always a good idea to kind of negotiate that as you go along, especially if somebody is, you know, not sure they want to be in a particular kind of conversation. You want to honor that, you know? Make sense?
Yes. And I've had all sorts of experiences, apparently with all the above. I recently bought a book on boundaries. I should find it when we're doing something else. But because it's interesting that you bring it up. I think even personally, I question my own boundaries and my own perception of other people's boundaries. I think I'm an open person, and so I expect everybody to be that way in a similar fashion. So if they're not forthcoming with me, then I question my own boundaries or my own perceptions. Because
Yeah.
I've even recently I've had dreams too of me thinking I've met those boundaries, or I've accepted those boundaries, or I've accepted my relationship to those boundaries, and then I have dreams where the same situation arises and I don't do it again. You know what I mean? So it's kind of odd. So obviously my psyche is playing with me and saying, no, you haven't quite resolved that issue yet.
Sounds like you're working on something, that's for sure. So the interesting part of it is that Ken, when you're talking about boundaries, would you say that this is an important dynamic to kind of delve into and set up guidelines at the beginning of a conversation one-on-one, or is it more helpful in a large group of people? So there's kind of the rules of the road, where if somebody's going to step off of those rules of the road, that they put their hand in the air and they say, this is coming out from left field, or some other way that you can indicate that this might not be okay with everybody, but it needs to be said at this point, in that person's opinion.
I think it's a both and it's it's interesting. Like we found one thing that was really helpful in the business, where our hiring process for Questor's Way, we would do kind of almost like this group orientation type thing prior to the hiring process. And one of the things we talked about was different business cultures and what they look like. And then we established very clearly what our business culture looked like. So things like, we're entrepreneurial, so it's a little bit less structured. It's less about an hierarchy and more about, parallel leadership. And it was the whole point behind that was that these are the boundaries by which we operate. And, are you going to be comfortable with that? So, and establishing that up front, it made it a lot easier. Like we found that when we would go through the hiring process, people felt more comfortable and more successful, by establishing that before we even hired them. So, and I think that sometimes in relationships, if there's a boundary we either intentionally or unintentionally overstep or feel that's been overstepped and we don't voice it, there's like this accumulative tension that starts occurring in the background, and it gets more and more uncomfortable because it gets harder and harder to address it the longer it goes. So I think there's value in it in both ways. I think the challenge is, how do you do it in a way where it's graceful, like, I don't know. I mean, you just hear absolutes a lot from people. Like, someone says they believe that, I want nothing to do with them. And that becomes like, like it becomes a barrier for even having any sense of,
it's the chip on the shoulder to knock off. Right?
Yeah. And, and those are human responses. It's just kind of interesting. It can make it challenging to navigate,
One of the things that I always enjoyed in business, both my own and when I was working in management in other companies, when we would do process days, and those were almost always getting feedback from the employees, ideas that they had in order to make things better. And there were three things that I said at the beginning of each one of these meetings. And the first one was, no idea is a bad idea. Have you ever heard people say that? Well, see, that's how you kick the can out in the middle of a circle, and then have people, be willing to kick the can themselves and swing and miss, that sort of thing. The second thing that I would say is, if anybody is ever offended or there's an abrupt answer, and why don't we ask that, first of all, you try to make the person who's saying it right, okay? Pretend for the moment that it's your opinion, and then if you need further clarification after having gone through making that person right, then stop the music and let's get it cleaned up before we move on, because we're going to be talking about all aspects of the business today, and we really want to get the best from everybody here. And then the last thing that we would say is, there are no things that are going to be coming out of this meeting that will be negative that anyone should remember after we complete this and we go out the doors. If something, or there's a heated exchange, so we're basically setting up the rules of the road, or the boundaries that people can operate on, and some will and some won't, So, but in the meantime, if you call time and somebody has stepped outside of one of those three areas and they're not willing to, to play according to the rules, the fourth thing is to get them all to agree and laugh and, have some fun. But if at any point things do go a little bit off the rails, then you can stop the music and you can say, what did we say we were going to do if something like this happened? And invariably, the A student always says, well, we said we were going to make that person right. And then the idea is for somebody else to articulate what they heard that would make the person right, and that the statement could be restated in different words. And then the person who made the statement that somebody took issue with would then say, yeah, I guess I meant that too, and then we would move on. And so this got to be, it was a little bit hinky the first couple of times, but then everybody started running their, what we called e-circles meetings, where we get together in the middle of the floor, solve problems together, and there's no bad ideas. We kick the can around, and then we all have the same rules. And 2 or 3 sentences, and then the rules of the road are there. And the boundaries are all agreed on ahead of time by all the players, and they're defined in the moment. And not, there's no definite boundary that's there in physically. It's a conversational boundary.
I'm happy to see that there's entrepreneurs and managers that do that, but I am in corporate America. We do not have circles of no boundaries and brainstorming. So, when that's part of your daily life of not having that, I mean, they have giant wallpapers of all these words that supposedly pertain to the company. And, you could go there. No, that's not happening. Nope. So, I mean, and now that we're home-based, it's even harder, but it was never part of the culture before. So I think when that's your whole day, to apply that to other places, and outside of my corporate life, I try to do that, not in those words per se, but personally, try to listen with that kind of ear, that there's no such thing as a bad idea or suggestion.
I think further to that, Lisa, was if people were having a conversation one-on-one and it ever sounded like a problem, that meant that if it sounds like a problem, we get the group together. Mm-hmm. No need, for people to share a problem with each other if there's not the right person there who can actually bring the solution. So get everyone together, put the can out in the middle, and give everybody a shot at it. And I know that this is probably something that Deming taught the Japanese back in the 1950s, when they were committed to increasing their quality, and then they brought it back across the pond again, with quality control and Ford and Toyota model and all the rest of that sort of thing. But talking to people, and everyone has an input, and they all decide as a team how best to go forward. What a neat concept, and what a radical change to the manufacturing floor, where the supervisor had to have all the answers back in the old days, and it turned into disciplinary situations and, all that. So if people are interested in making things better, they put that at stake in their relationship with each other. As Ken was saying, this is a shared leadership kind of a model that we're doing here. And what does that usually mean to somebody who accepts the job and hasn't had a whole lot of leadership training before, Ken?
So I have a question for Lisa that's answering. Hopefully, it will answer what you what you just asked, Bill. In those situations, I guess what I'm curious about is how how much how much of the disconnect between like the words on the wall and everything is related to a disconnect between the individual's like needs or purpose and the corporate or like the group's needs and purpose. Like, do you see any correlation between alignment? So so someone's thinking about their own career advancement, for example, and in order to do that they've got to go counter to what the organization's needs are, or someone else in the group, that kind of thing. Have you seen like a correlation between those things?
When you first started speaking, like I admire the advancements and the of the higher ups of the organization, because they're looking to the future and they've done a good job about technologically and financially, I suppose, keeping up, going beyond the Joneses kind of thing in business. But because it's beyond nationwide, but at least nationwide within the local markets, I think the management style is more of a corporate response instead of an employee interest. At least, that's
Okay.
our experience. So, I trying to think of even having a meeting lately or that kind of atmosphere where there's even a discussion of anything. If any, there's only the only meetings we have is like, here's what we're doing and here's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Kind of response. And then once you're in a department, there's very little because the software is so specific to our industry that and each department has specific software. There's no place for crossover or even advancing. Basically, it's so specific.
Okay.
There's also a kind of a dynamic. Have you ever seen Michael Gerber speak publicly? When he talks about the E-Myth and he talks about the leader of the band, and he talks about how the organization is either going to be set up to make his job easy, or it's going to be set up that where he makes his job hard. And he being a woman or a man, it doesn't really matter. But I did a couple of things back in the early 1990s with a computer company. Once I figured out we had a chance of making it to year 4 and 5, that it looked like we actually had a runway here, that this company was going to be around for a minute. At that time, I think we had either 11 or 12 employees, and we went over to the brand new, newly opened Residence Inn over in Meriden, Connecticut, and we spent a weekend. And essentially, we went through a process where all of the people that were there, the goals were to kind of set up some rules of the road, some operating instructions for the business, some parameters for what we're going to do when people have problems and how we're going to resolve those, and how we're going to focus our attention on being the best customer service provider on the face of the planet. So we opened up on Friday evening with comments about, in order for us to figure out how we're going to get to where we're going, we have to design a mission that has an endpoint of where we want to be. So over the weekend, we worked together to come up with this mission statement. And it was done through a 2-day process of people working in small groups. And the words go like, we are Progressive Data Systems Incorporated. Who we are is an organization of committed professionals dedicated to empowering people through partnered leadership and unleashing everyone's capacity to live life abundantly. Extraordinary service, integrity, excellence, and responsibility for complete satisfaction as a way of doing business is what we stand for. We promise to deliver this in everything we do. This is who we are, and for this we can be counted on no matter what. So that still chokes me up 30 years later. However, Lisa, did we go through a period of time in the late 1990s and the early 2000s where not many of those people were still around and they weren't quite sure what this mission statement meant and they were just words? We printed it on the back of all of our business cards back in the day. And we made sure that when we handed our business card, to a potential client or another vendor or a partner in the business, another business person, we always handed it with the mission statement up, because we thought that the name and the phone number on the other side, that was the back side of the card, with the logo and everything. The mission statement was what we wanted to lead with. So I know what you're talking about, where the things go up on the wall. Sometimes they paint them, don't they? The words of Mahatma Gandhi and Henry Ford and, all these really great, wonderful, Bucky Fuller always gets quoted for some reason. I have no idea why that is. But yeah, I mean, what brings juice to a group of people, it has to be rejuvenated. I mean, this is something that I saw at Quester's Way that Ken did with all of his folks. They were on the floor doing this with each other all the time. This is one of the things that we wanted to bring, to our e-groups and e-circles, at in the manufacturing floor as well.
Right. And I think I've had experiences, with being on the church board or running a softball league or things like that, where we do that. But I have noticed too that even in those circumstances, it's not typical or comfortable even for people to do a real brainstorming. People are so used to yelling out that it's a bad idea or no, we can't do that. And it's hard to bring people back. And I've noticed that in all kinds of different circles. So I'm happy that people like you and Ken are doing work like this, and that I'm, trying to apply it to different situations, even if I can't do it in my day job. But outside of that, trying to enforce boundaries, but then trying to open up boundaries too, so that we can talk more, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's very powerful. The whole idea of having an alignment from day one, that every single person who joins the company after that gets greeted by somebody who is part of the team and has been trained up, to be at the same level as everybody else. And in their job, they are the king. They are the person who is the expert at what they do. You're in customer service, that's fantastic, that's great. You're in sales, that's fantastic. You're in tech support, really well done. You go around and you empty the trash, man, you're just as important as every other person in this building. We can't do this without you. There are no jobs that are trivial in what we do here. So the words have to be spoken frequently in the present in order for the juice to stay there. They can't be just said one time in the past and have any effect on the future.
Yeah, I lived up to. I mean, that's
And easy to remember.
Yeah.
Like, like there are two things that helped us a lot. And one was, I don't remember where I got it from. It might have been a Simon Sinek book, I'm not sure, but just they were talking about, like the CEO has these, the leadership in a company, for example, has these priorities, and the assumption is that everyone knows what they are. But then when you ask the people that work for them, they have no clue.
Yes.
And, and it struck us, and we, so with each of our businesses, and whenever I worked with businesses, just helping out, we had three, so like Quester's Way, number one, meaningful human connection. That's it. That's all you have to remember. If you're in an interaction, how can you make this interaction one that's meaningful for the child, for the parent, for each other? And second was empowered learning. So it's just, we're all teachers, we're all inspiring people's ability to learn how to learn. We didn't care what they're learning. It was just them on that discovery process. And then best day ever was just the present moment. You're here right now. Let's make it enjoyable. And you'd ask anyone in the company what our priorities are, and they could say those three things, and they could remember those three things in that order, and it helped. The other thing I learned from someone in Phoenix, he was a really cool real estate guy, Lisa. He with meetings, and I don't know who he got this from or if this was his own creation, but he uh, wouldn't allow someone to start with a problem. Basically, he had a formula. It's like, if you want to voice something, first offer a solution, even if it wouldn't work or it's unrealistic. Next, tell us what resources would be required for that solution, and then if necessary, tell us what the problem is. And I adopted that, and it was really cool. I lost count of how many times people would come to me and about to voice a problem, and then they'd stop because I'll put them in timeout if they did that. Tell them to come back and reframe it. And usually they'd end up figuring out what to do before they got like half a sentence out, because it just like got them thinking about it differently. And we had fun with it. We weren't like, being real demanding about it. And sometimes, you just had to talk about the problem. But that had some interesting results. And again, it was easy for people to remember because it's just 3 steps. And you can just say, wait, you're about to talk about a problem, can we apply those 3 steps? And then they knew. So that was super helpful for us.
Absolutely. I keep thinking about, some of the world leaders and how they trained people and how they set up the boundaries. Are you familiar with the story, Henry Kissinger, when he became the Secretary of State? He had a June grad that came to work for him who was a recently graduated attorney, a lawyer who came to work in the White House. And he was looking for a report on some subject that he was going to be meeting with a foreign diplomat. And so he asked, it was a woman, according to my recollection, and he asked her to research a topic for him, and she brought him a first draft. And he asked her one question. He said, "Is this the best you can do?" And she said, "Well, I gave it a lot." He said, "Would you please take it back and do the best you can do?" And then the next time she came back, he asked her the same question again. "Is this the best you can do?" And she said, "Well, I've got a couple of areas." He said, "Well, you know what to do, right?" And so this went on like 3 or 4 more times, and finally the woman brings him the report. She hands it to him, and he says, "Is this?" He said, "Dr. Kissinger, this is the very best that I can possibly do. If this isn't good enough for you, you need somebody else in this job." He said, "Okay, great. I will read it now." And so that sets the expectation and the runway for the boundaries. If you don't do the best you possibly can the first time, don't bring it to them to look at. Bring it to them when it's a complete unit and you can stand on every single word and they all make sense. So I kind of enjoyed that as more or less the I don't know many corporate environments where a manager could get away with doing that for very long, but can you imagine what it would be like? I mean, this is almost like the Devil Wears Prada sort of thing, that the level of expectation for excellence in performance and everything that you possibly do, from the very small task to the big deals, And I think people get it when they work in that type of an environment. I think they really want to give it their all and get out of bed with the expectation that today is going to be a day that really matters. And most people don't have access to those words, best day ever. However, if you say that to them, I've never heard anybody say, "No, I wasn't hoping this would be the best day ever." I had that last week. I don't expect to have another one of those for months, Anyhow, so more on boundaries. So we've got small business guys here. You came out of the service too, right? As I recalled, you were in the Army, if I remember correctly, right, Ken?
Yep.
And yeah, so there were some years that went by in between that training and then when you started your own business. Where do you think the tipping point was for you to more or less get into the mode of how we do things is, the boundary setting by an entrepreneur, in my current experience, they don't do much of it. They go out and they try to get an order from somebody, or they try to get the language to explain what they can do to a client or for a client. But there's not this preparation in advance the way that I've seen you do it in your business. And I'm just wondering, what would you point to that you would say, that was the day or that was the year that I knew I had to do things the way I've been doing it since?
There was no one day. It was a decades long. It has been a decades long experiment of screwing up and getting good feedback, and I think the thing Jim Collins talks about something that I think has been super helpful in Good to Great, and he talks about leaders' window and mirror maturity, and he was talking about some of the actual super successful CEOs of companies. No one even knows who they are.
Right.
They're not common names. Their picture's never been on a magazine, because what they do is when things go well, they point out the window to circumstances. They'll talk about luck. They'll talk about their amazing team or the opportunity that the timing was good. And then when things go wrong, they look right in the mirror. They take personal responsibility for it. They own it. And it was an interesting thing, because then you have other leaders who do the exact opposite. When things go wrong, they blame everything: the economy, the people they were working for weren't good enough. But then they're right there in the spotlight when things go well. And it struck me, having read that was really how I was kind of mentored and taught. I was fortunate in that respect, to just take personal accountability for the mistakes that were made. And even if it wasn't my fault, to pretend it was, and that led to more and more solutions. And for me personally, what I found was I was very creative and kind of loose and optimistic and maybe a little naive in business. So so I needed to apply some rigor that would create banks for that river, and then really learn to be very disciplined and just own it, good or bad, whether it was fair or not fair. Just own it and stay focused on the results that were trying to be produced, and also not take it so personal. But it was no one thing. What's interesting about the military, is they own you. So, you talk about, if you sign up to be in the military, forget about your own personal boundaries. Those aren't relevant. It's mission first. And, they're going to tell you when you wake up, they're going to tell you when you eat, they're going to tell you what you wear. They're going to tell you where you go. So it's kind of an interesting experience. And then coming out of that, you have all of this freedom in the civilian world. Now you've got to kind of, I think what it can help you do is think in terms of, how do I balance those freedoms against, the discipline that creates true manifestation of these opportunities. So, but yeah, it's just been day by day, paying attention as best I can.
Well, I've always enjoyed in any business where this is truly practiced, where the leader, the CEO, the owner of the business actually takes the time to sit people down and say, hey, from here on out, everything that works that's going to be because of you. You're here to do the things that I'm not capable of doing, or that I don't care to do, or I really, have no idea how I would run the business if I were doing those. And I even if I enjoy it and I'm good at it, the business doesn't grow unless I have you here. That's what your responsibility is, to take this over, and in all applications exceed anything that I could possibly do. Now, if you can do that, anything that goes wrong is going to be my fault. Okay. And this isn't just one of those platitudes. This is called, you'd never complain to anyone that can't make a difference with a solution. And that being said, once somebody takes responsibility for it got broke, it's not functioning, that didn't work. Now you're done with that part. Now you can move on. What's the next step? What do we do from here? What are we trying now? Where do we go? There's no energy that is ever recouped of doing a who shot John on, like, they do this so it'll never, ever, ever happen again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? It continues happening over and over and over again while they're doing all of the post-mortem and trying to figure out what went wrong and what the problem was. And, they rewrite procedures and policies and all that kind of stuff because it seemed like there was a loophole in it. Complete bunk and nonsense. The whole idea is to take as much energy in the business as possible and focus it on actions that will deliver, satisfaction to the clients, the customers, the vendors, and all of the employees. And if that's happening, it's beautiful. It's music.
Well, I guess the other question is like, where's the focus point? Like, what are you measuring? And I mean, and this can be in a family, in a church or a business. It doesn't matter. Does everybody know what you're actually measuring? Like, for us, it was always about the experience, the human experience, and of course you need things like, cash flow and, safety procedures or whatever. I mean, it's still a business, it's got to function, and the money is the blood, and you have to measure that. How do you prioritize it? And like, you hear things like people over profit, and I get a little annoyed with those little quotes because, again, they can be the saying on the wall that isn't actually acted on. But at the same time, for some businesses, it may be that's the metric that they're measuring is profit. So, but if you know that up front, you can decide if you're the type of person that will flourish in that environment. So now we're back to boundaries. I mean, it's how clear are they?
Yes.
I don't think it even matters what they are. It's just being clear, and then, deciding how well you can operate within that framework. And if you can't, either you got to change your situation or you got to change yourself.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of interesting,
Yeah. The tongue-in-cheek isms of the 1980s and early 1990s were, what do you want to be here at this company? Well, I want to fight my way up to middle management, and
Yeah.
I want to work long hours and get paid low pay so that I can maximize the profit of the owners and shareholders. All of these sort of things that were disconnected from how people really operate and what springs them out of bed, anxious and ready to go. So that and my other favorite quote was, we got a motivation problem around here. These employees are just not motivated. And then you watch them all at 4:00 on Friday afternoon clocking out. They're all gone out of the building in less than 60 seconds, right? and it's hard getting them back in on Monday morning. They're motivated for something around here. It just may not be that you're putting the right thing out in front of them at this point. So
the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Now you're talking.
I've literally been on the receiving ends of those beatings. It happens when you're in the martial arts for a long time, It's not even metaphorical.
Oh, no. They come at different parts of your body at different times when you don't expect it, right?
Yep.
Martial arts is obviously different lessons and boundaries too. Just listening, who Sean Corn is in yoga. Do you know?
She's not familiar, no.
Off that into the world. She's for doing nonprofits, but talking about creating a business that's based on interconnection and improving people's lives. Like there was a summit I just listened to called We Rise Up, and even Tony Robbins was part of it. So the new definition of success is, what that is. So that obviously includes different kinds of boundaries and ways of setting goals, not for yourself as well as everybody else.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you don't know what is and isn't acceptable in your own life, and where the flexibility is in that, how do you figure out what team to join? Like what to be a part, what cause to champion, any of the, if anything. It's interesting. There's definitely that self work is helpful in figuring out where you fit.
Yeah, the whole mindful application to your life is it's key. I mean, it's really key to everything. And how you negotiate for a situation that works is being, I don't know, brutally honest about what isn't working. So, for instance, I'm showing folks my Apple iWatch, or just called a watch these days, that I got for Father's Day. I haven't worn a watch in years because it annoyed me that I had a habit of glancing at the time every once in a while, and that's not who I am. I want to give my full attention to the people in front of me. So I told you that story to tell you this one. I love this watch. This thing has so much going on, and it's connected with health. And there's an activity monitor that has 3 circles, right?
And a show his as well.
Yeah. So movement, exercise, and standing. And it looks like sitting is the new cigarette smoking. And so you've got to get up and move around during the course of the day, right? So I had this watch, and it's got a small little dial on it. And I was, sometimes I'd get the standing circle, sometimes I'd get the movement circle. I almost never got all 3 circles in the same day. And never, for the first 2.5 months that I had to watch, never did I complete all 3 of the circles, but maybe one time in that entire deal, right? Or I happened to walk 11,000 steps in one day. We'll talk about that another time. So last week I sat down and I went in and I looked at it and I go, holy mackerel, I don't have to have this thing set on 800 calories. I'm not ever going to do 800 calories worth of anything. And oh, by the way, instead of an hour's worth of exercise, why don't I make it 25 minutes? Let's just see, And then the standing, 12 hours. Yeah, I do that one more than anything else, but let's back that down too. I just want to get the piece of cheese here and I want to get rewarded. And, I've closed all 3 of the rings every single day since I ratcheted it down. And now that I close the rings, I can move the rings up and increase the time periods week over week. And so it's just one of those neat little games to play where the boundary that was here, that you really need to do this if you want to be a healthy human being, is walk 10,000 steps a day, exercise for 60 minutes, and stand at least 12 times for 10 to 15 minutes, whatever, right? Change the rules. Make the rules work for you. Give yourself an opportunity to get the benefit of having the tools and having, all of this going in your life. Thank you, girls. I appreciate my Father's Day present.
Yeah, it's funny, the other value to that, because I use the same thing, and it's like that self accountability that you choose to make it important. And I'll tell you, those silly rings have been life changing for me, because I decided to close the rings. I was just coming through a difficult point in my life, and I've been sick and all that kind of stuff. So it was January 1st, 2019. And back then you didn't have as much, you couldn't change stuff on it. Like now you can change everything. You didn't used to be able to change like the exercise goal or the stand goal, which is really cool, because I agree with you, Bill. It's so helpful to be able to bring it to where you are, and then you can move it up as appropriate. But it was so fascinating, because I just made a commitment to get through the month of January, and then I did it. I was like, keep going. And now here we are, moving to the end of September of 2021, and I've closed the rings every day since January 1st of 2019. It's like it's just become a habit, It's just so funny, and it's not even like a big deal, It's just became a habit. But that ability to have some kind of just a small personal accountability tool has been huge. Like play with the other thing that's in the watch is they do the breathe and mindful minutes.
Yes.
And you can set it so it'll just give you a little haptic bump and say, hey, take a minute to breathe. And even if that's something you've done professionally for years, it's so helpful. Just getting that little, reminder. And then at the end of the day, it'll tell you how many minutes you did, and you can set little goals for yourself and stuff. But yeah, I think not for everybody, but I think for a lot of people, having that kind of, something that helps you track, and notice trends is super helpful.
Well, see, that's the cool part about this. When I glance at my wrist now, I'm being mindful. You know,
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
important information that relates to. I went from a resting heart rate of in the 60 beats per minute into the low 50s. You know, by doing the daily exercise, by
Yep.
the whole deal, which also translates into lowest cholesterol I've ever had in my entire life. And this last 6 month, I just came off of a 6 month review day before yesterday. And my doctor's just like, nonplussed about all of it. Oh, yeah, yeah, you lost another 8 pounds in the last 2 months. So that's pretty cool. And she goes, oh, where are you going? How about 210? How does that sound to you? From 235. So the whole thing is that it also gets to be part of the culture, and the people that are our supporters that they're interested in it too. And the questions about the beard and when's that going to go away? Is that a COVID beard, or is that something you're keeping from now on? And I don't know. But I do know that having a Jiminy Cricket on my arm, and I explain to people, I'm not being rude. It's telling me important information about my health. Is that okay with you? Nobody ever has a problem with that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The technology is getting really super cool.
Yeah.
Just as a, and it's funny, as frustrated as we get with technology and, like social media and that kind of stuff, it is a tool that has a lot of value if it's being used appropriately. So yeah, I agree with you, Bill. I've found that super, super helpful over the last few years.
Yeah. If you're in a group of people, then you get half a dozen of them that all raise their hand. They got a watch on too. So
Yep.
you're preaching to the choir, sir. It's all good.
Yeah.
So in terms of boundaries, um, you know, I'm very interested. We've talked about the boundaries, but how about the no boundaries? Have you had experiences where there's little or no emphasis placed on explaining what's coming next and how people deal with that? And uh, I'm not sure that I can tell you stories about where people just did everything that they wanted to when they wanted to do it, and had conversations in any way that they potentially would have them, and that the company did well. I think the opposite tends to show up more than when people are wide open, and that sort of a liberated, everybody gets to do what they want to around here. I've seen that happen in billion-dollar corporations a little bit, but I don't think it works for the entire, employee population. I think it works for maybe engineers or for code writers or something of that nature. I haven't really seen it work, across the board in an entire company.
Or ones that are supposedly working. I mean, I have a friend's son works for Google, and he came back back east to visit, and he was practically suicidal that he had to go back to work. And that's supposed to be one of those environments that caters to the no boundary, or do whatever, or everything is here to make your life easier, better, more productive. We've done the studies. This is what you need to be that way.
There does seem to be, so this is anecdotal. I don't have any hands-on knowledge in the last 15 years, but I did work for a company that was in Silicon Valley back in the 1980s. I'm a laser manufacturer in Palo Alto. But in the last 15 years, the seeming is that you have all these benefits in terms of daycare for children, on-site workout rooms, places where you can go and meditate. You can do all of these different things. And then what ends up happening in those environments that I hear through the grapevines, and no personal experience whatsoever, so this may not be useful, is there's kind of a mindset thing that's going on in terms of how people, how their thought processes are conditioned, and how they're told what things are appropriate or inappropriate for them to be able to act on or have conversations with other employees or those kinds of things. So I'm wondering, with all that freedom and all the free stuff, If you don't have the ability, to have your own opinion and have the safety and the openness to be able to voice opinions, uh, what good is that? Be interested in interviewing your the man you were talking about who didn't want to go back to work.
I know. I have to follow up with what happened.
The question, the first question would be, what's up with that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's other, smaller companies like where my sister is, and and I don't know. I know there's been studies about once you give something to your employees, then they either expect it or expect something better. And if they don't receive that again, then they're, disappointed or disgusted or very vocal about not what they're not getting. And I know there's been studies about that's kind of like human nature. Once you get something, you expect it to happen perpetually. So
Yes.
I don't know what those boundaries are. I mean, that's a boundary in a different sort of way.
Well, we always found, working in larger companies, I'm saying with 400 to 600 employees, larger, not real big companies, that the pay was a short-term motivator. People would get a raise, and then after they got their first paycheck, it would be like, what have you done for me lately? And then, but what we found was the giving people responsibility or giving them accountability and charge over something where this is your baby. When this runs, you get all the say so, you get all the credit, and they just loved that. I mean, that's why I think in banks they give people, almost everybody except for the lowest paid teller, a vice presidential title. They have more vice presidents in banks than probably any other business that I'm aware
Oh, we do too. There's a vice president of everything.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's he's a online gaming programmer.
Yeah.
He's been doing it for quite some time, and he was telling me they've lost quite a few of their team to, I want to say it's Amazon is like starting to break into that market, and they've left. So the company he works for, it's kind of smaller, it's the pay isn't as good, and so these people are shifting over to where they're making more money, they're getting better benefits, blah 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 blah. And for him, his reason for doing what he does is he loves the game that he gets to work on and the people who play it, and it's really about the interaction with the gamers and making their experience better and getting feedback from him. And he says it gets super stressful, especially they've got some employee churn right now that they're challenged by, but the stress is kept in balance by his enjoyment of the work he does. And I always wonder, I mean, if like someone who worked at Google, how happy was he? And is it just that at some point either he changed or the environment changed, and now the stress has become higher than the meaning behind the work that he was doing? Is there a disconnect? And that could happen in either direction. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not the same worker that I was 20 years ago. Like what I find meaning in has changed, so it could be, I think that's why a lot of entrepreneurs end up selling businesses and doing something else. They change, and they've done that. And now, the search for meaning has brought them to some other expression of work that they're now looking for that fulfillment from. So it's just kind of interesting. That's what I'd be curious about.
Right.
What led to the change? What led to that feeling? And was it always like that? Or, was that a gradual shift that kind of got out of hand, like the frog in the pot type thing? Be curious.
Well, sure.
Yeah, that interesting thing, or maintaining. I heard somebody describe success as, or interest in your work by staying with something that you're so passionate about that you want to create a masterpiece. So until you get to that point, you know what I mean? If you're in the joy and the passion of creating that, like I think your gaming friend is, he's still involved in that point where, he hasn't created his masterpiece yet. So he's happily involved in it. And I kind of like that explanation. Whereas I think I can't even assume what that friend's son was doing, but I got the impression that it was stressed from the get-go. So I can't speak from that, but that was speak to it anyhow. But
well, I muted myself and I Googled how many employees Google has. They have 139,000, and I have a feeling there's something resembling a bell curve across that spectrum. So you're probably going to find that, on both ends, you got people that would do it for free and almost do, and the other end, the people will, they're looking for a new job, right? So it's all kind of neat, but the wide openness of one other thing I just want to bring up is, throughout my personal career, the hard work that I had to do in the long hours were mitigated by the person I worked for. If I had what I considered to be a nurturing, mentoring, manager, supervisor, whoever I reported to, if I really understood them to have my back, to care about my well-being, that some people would come in and say, it's time for you to go home. Okay, I got one more report I want to do tonight. I've got some things to set up for training tomorrow. No, go home. No, seriously, go home. And these are great people. And but I had some that I wouldn't. Let me put it to you this way: they were definitely the flogging mentality, no doubt about it. And they were dream stealers and found fault with everything, and public dressing down in front of the employees and other managers and that sort of thing. I didn't last there very long for some reason. I don't know why that was. I didn't really take to that environment. I went and found some place where I felt appreciated and worked weekends and holidays and all that other stuff that you do while you're implementing new software and what have you. So that's the corporate side. Your mileage will vary there as well. You're not going to. But the other thing, Lisa, that I'm kind of, I want to suggest to everyone listening, make a difference. If there's something missing, you might want to find somebody that you can get the ear of and say, hey, look, there is something, due to COVID, the fact that we're all working separately, we don't get together and see each other very much anymore. The esprit de corps that I've felt here at other times, working in the company, it needs a little boost. It needs, for us to start getting related to those sayings on the wall again. I kind of think that coming from the right person to the right person in the right way might get some action, and get something on the schedule to where people actually get back together and start building this future together. I don't know. Just remember I said so, okay?
Definitely.
And if it goes well, you get the credit. If it doesn't go well, blame it on me. All my fault. So anyhow, anything more to share about boundaries, no boundaries? The silence indicates that we have
covered a lot. Yeah.
That one, around the tent. So with that said, any closing thoughts or any final things that come to your mind to say sign off and good luck?
I think boundaries are my boundaries are changing, like, probably daily, as far as, and my perception of what a boundary is, and within my business life and within my personal life, well, everything's constantly adapting. So I celebrate the small wins and I celebrate the closer interconnectedness with people, and if that can just improve in every level, then I think that's a good day.
Awesome. That's a great thing to share. Ken?
Yeah. I think giving ourselves permission to remember that things are complex and rarely fully within our control. So it's not like you get to figure it out and then go and apply it and it will work. It's like teaching. you have a great lesson plan and then go into a classroom full of 6-year-olds and watch how quick that lasts. And it's not you, it's not them, it's just is. So, and learning to be a little gentle with ourselves and, take the feedback, reflect, and just keep recalibrating as best we can. And the journey is the home, is what my mentor said to me. And that's always been really helpful to remember.
A great place to live, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a man that I really respected who did the climbing metaphor, and the reason for climbing is because we're climbing. And so what are we doing? We're climbing. And why are we climbing? Because we're climbing, So it just went back and forth for about 5 or 10 minutes. And it again kind of drives home that the enjoyment comes from appreciating and being mindful of the journey that you are on. If you're only driven to accomplish goals and to get things done and check them off the list, what do you do when there's nothing else on the list? Where do you go when you're no longer challenged? The whole idea is when you have boundaries and they're not working for you, and you usually come up with that brilliant idea long after it breaks down and it isn't functioning properly, but they're upgradable. You can replace them with totally new ones. They work best if it's not functioning properly, when you get the group together and say, hey, what do we got here? Let's all put our best thoughts together and describe the solution, and then tell us what the resources will be. And then if you need to, give us the problem. Anyway, folks, thank you so much. We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and we're everywhere podcasts are. And thank you very much for your kind attention. And thank you, Lisa and Ken, for your partnership in this. I believe this is episode number 79.
Yay.
All right.
Awesome.
Good night, mates. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcast, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.